For a long time, I struggled with men. I didn't trust them. I didn't like them. I'd spent a lifetime being bullied, pushed around, messed with. Over the course of the last 15 years of my life, I did my own work. I grew with my wife and son. I have become happily someone who loves men.
What are the rules to being a man? Is it showing no fear, not expressing sadness, being completely self-sufficient and not needing anyone? Or is it showing your emotions, treasuring your friendships, holding space for others? In today's episode, we break down manhood in a way that is going to surprise and I think inspire you. Hi, my name is Andrea Miller. I am the host of Getting Open, and I am so excited to bring this episode to you. But before we get into it, quickly in the comments, let me know, what is your definition of manhood? What are those characteristics that really make somebody masculine? And in the end, I want you to come back and tell me if your opinion's changed. Okay, let's get into it. Mark Greene writes and speaks on creating a healthy culture of masculine expression and connection. His books include Remaking Manhood and the Little Me Too book for men. He is co-author with Dr. Saliha Baba of the Relational Book for Parenting and the Relational Workplace. Mark is co-host of the Remaking Manhood podcast and the co-founder of Walking, Talking Men. Mark, welcome to Getting Open. So nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what ChatGPT says about you to get started. Are you ready?
Fire away.
Fire away. This is good. And there is a context here. It's not just flattery. Mark Greene has become one of the most influential contemporary voices reshaping how we think about masculinity, relationships, and emotional connection. His work sits at the intersection of men's cultural conditioning, relational intelligence, and the systemic habits that shape our families, workplaces, and communities. What's distinctive about Greene is his approach. He doesn't frame men as broken or morally compromised, but as products of a restrictive man box culture that limits emotional expression, relational depth, and vulnerability. His mission is to help men and the people who love and work with them reclaim connection as a superpower. And I'm just going to say, as a mother of 2 teen boys and a lover of men, heck yeah, Mark.
Well, thank you. You know, it never occurred to me to ask ChatGPT anything about myself. Well.
There's so much more, but rather than reading about you, we're gonna get into it. But I wanted to start with that, really to frame this discussion, because there's a lot that we're going to cover. But let's start with defining the problem. Man box culture. What is that?
Well, there was a guy named Paul Kivel in the early 1980s. He went around to boys in high schools in the Oakland area. And like all good research, he asked them a very simple question. You know, what are the rules for being a man? And they told him, over and over again. And over the years that he continued asking this question of boys, he kept getting the same answer. And I went to a high school 3 years ago here in New York and did a presentation and posed that question and got the same answer from an auditorium full of 13-year-old boys and girls and presumably non-binary kids. And the answers he got were things like, don't show your emotions, be tough, never ask for help, be a breadwinner, not a caregiver, be heterosexual, not homosexual. If you're going to talk to other boys and men, talk about sports or cars, don't talk about anything deep. And this lovely rule, have power over women and girls. And this is a generations old idea. It didn't begin with Paul Kivel. He's just the first guy who said, hey, let's see if we can understand what's inherently being passed down generation by generation about what it means to be a man. And these rules of man box culture ultimately are about what we do as men. So we're constantly being policed by the men around us to ensure that we're sticking to those rules and performing successfully, that we're having enough sex, that we're making enough money, that we're displaying power over women and girls, that we're doing this stuff. And it doesn't matter what you did yesterday in a culture of doing. You have to prove you're doing it today. And what that tells us ultimately is that man box culture really doesn't care who we are authentically or what's going on for us. It cares about us proving that we're conforming to its rules.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, and even that doing versus being, right? That, I mean, if anything, I've way gotten into just this idea of finding that balance between feminine energy and masculine energy. I'm a fairly dominant in my masculine energy, and that's the culture we've grown up in. It's like do rather than who you are. You said it, who you are authentically, right? And it's a very different energy. But we'll park that for now. So okay, so what are you? You're doing a lot. What are the things that you are doing that you think are making the biggest impact to helping upend man box culture?
Well, one of the things I've been doing for at least 10, 12 years is promoting the work of Niobe Way and Judy Chu. And Niobe Way is a professor at NYU, and she did another very important study with a simple question. And the question she asked boys is, what does your best friend mean to you? Her book, Deep Secrets, has been out for almost 15 years now, but it summarizes what she learned from boys about the process by which this culture of masculinity I mentioned earlier trains boys into disconnecting from their close friendships in early adolescence. And I would just want to say that this research and this idea is borne out by research by Equimundo and Movember and in Judy Chu's work. And it is a crucial and central frame for what's going on with boys and men, especially in light of what we've come to understand as an epidemic of loneliness for men. So she would say, what's your best friend mean to you? And in early adolescence, 13-year-old boys would say, well, I love my best friend. They'd use the word love unashamedly. And then they would also say, without my best friend, I would go crazy. So they're naming right there a mental health component. The idea that being in close friendship with another boy, talking about what's going on for them, is keeping them sane, is giving them the capacity to process life. Then by late adolescence, these same boys, because they've been hit over and over again with cultural messages about what it means to be mature and be a man, let go of these close relationships. And when Way dug a little deeper, what she found out is these boys had stopped being interested in who they are authentically and began being interested in proving what they are not. And the three things they're worried about proving they're not by late adolescence is little kids, girly, or gay. They let go of those close friendships, and their suicide rates become 4 times that of girls. So if we can just look at this piece collectively, all of us, and say, what is going on with our culture of masculinity that trains boys to give up something that they said they would have gone crazy without just a few years before? Well, the only way you get boys to give up something that meaningful is to traumatize them and bully them and attack them. And this is what we're talking about. A culture of masculinity that attacks young boys and creates men who are disconnected from themselves, disconnected from the communities and the people around them, and who are relying on dominance behavior and aggression as a way to validate a form of masculinity that is arguably, dare I use the word, toxic, both to them and to everyone else. And I don't use the phrase toxic masculinity. The phrase I want to use is toxic culture of masculinity.
Right. Whew, oh my God, there's a lot to unpack there. I'd love to show this wonderful little animated graphic that I found on your Instagram account. Dane, do you mind pulling that up? Because you're connecting the dots between the disconnection and I want to say the conditioning maybe, or the trauma. So I'd love just to have you talk us through this to give even just a little more context about this, if you will, this vicious cycle that we are in right now. So this is a wonderful animation called The Closed Loop of Domination-Based Masculinity. It says, in dominance-based man culture, boys are pressured from infancy to hide their emotional expression, physical pain, and fear. And it shows, it's like for those of you watching, you can see it, but for those of you listening, it's like an infinity symbol, right? Like a number 8 on its side. And so there's this loop of disconnection. And then when boys express too much emotion, they're asked, what are you, a girl? And are you a sissy? To bully them back to the man box. And then by late adolescence, boys are successfully pressured to abandon close friendships, convinced that their need for connection is girly, sissy, or gay, like you said. It is at this time boys' suicide rates become 4 times that of girls, their age, as you said. And in this man box culture, denigrating the feminine is key to suppressing boys' expression and connection. For boys, it is constant, taking place hourly, continuing throughout men's adult lives. So it brainwashes young boys into viewing girls and men as less before they even know what's happening. Denigrating the feminine suppresses boys' natural human capacities for empathy and compassion, cue the disconnection, making possible the daily display of contempt for women and girls, catcalling, etc., as a shortcut to masculine validation. It is also at the root of our epidemic of economic and sexual violence against women perpetrated by men trained from infancy to see women as less and to view dominance as central to masculine identity. Once boys are taught that women are less, it takes little effort to convince them that BIPOC, LGBTQI plus people, immigrants, are also less, which leads to their recruitment into white supremacy and other extremist groups. By training boys out of connection, man box culture subjects them to lifetimes of anxiety, depression, violence, addictions, chronic illnesses, and suicide, resulting in early mortality for men. Man box culture's domination-based worldview fuels conflict. Men then double down on dominance as the only acceptable way to respond to personal or professional relationship challenges in man box culture, looping men back into disconnection. Cue the vicious cycle. This is the ironclad closed loop of domination-based masculinity, an isolating and violent trap for men and all those lives we impact. Whew. Mark, I have to tell you, I saw this before, but I didn't read it out loud, and my whole body is tingling right now with like every like cortisol and like stress hormone in my body is like red alert. Why? I mean, where do I even go with this? Why is this? I mean, this is the loneliness epidemic has been a crisis, and people are talking about it. It feels like at the fringes about this crisis happening to men and boys, or the concerns rather. But it really feels like it actually is a crisis especially when you frame it like that. And as a mom, as a sister to a brother, and coworker to men, and like I said, lover of men, like what you shared and just a consumer of our culture as a civilian living in America, like this rings so freaking true and so painful and so avoidable. I mean, 'cause it's not just bad for women. I mean, it's really bad for everybody.
It is, most certainly. And, welcome to my world. I think about this stuff a lot. And one of the things I think about is women's experience of this conversation, right? Which is one of the ways that it can show up, and I think justifiably, is I don't care that men are lonely. Men are lonely because they don't know how to be human. And that is an angry response and a generalization that is both understandable and that we can see past. And one of the things that I sometimes say in these conversations is, look, I understand you have very little patience for men who are out there behaving in these ways. So let's just dial it down in age. Okay, do you have compassion for 18-year-old men? Not really. 16-year-old men, I don't know, 14, 13, 10, 9, 6. At what age can we engage with some compassion around what's going on with boys and men, and then try and from that positionality create some positive change? And there is significant positive change happening, one. And two, there is significant ways that we can connect. And one of the things I say, again, to keep it simpler, is, look, we can do work with men my age. We can do work with men in their 30s. We can help men reconnect to those natural human capacities, which men don't get rid of, they just suppress. Things like empathy and compassion and caregiving and holding uncertainty and all those stuff that are crucial to having a real, genuine, meaningful friendship or relationship. We can help men reconnect to that, or we can just not break them in the first place. And when we stand by while our young sons are being pummeled by this culture that teaches them that toughness and hiding your emotions and never asking for help is what it means to be a man, we can do something as simple as parents and coaches and teachers and anyone engaged with young men. We can do what Ashanti Branch does with them, who runs the Million Mask movement. We can do them what lots of other healthy masculinity advocates are doing. We can talk to them. We can ask them what's going on in their lives. We can ask our young sons, what meaning are you making of the things that you're seeing? And what meaning are you making of our relationship between a parent and a child? What does it mean to be human for you in this family? Do you feel like you get heard? Do you feel like, and in these conversations, we begin to invite them to feel fully seen and to feel like they contribute to what's being created. Because for most boys and men, the way that they get off track is this sense that they don't have any real say in what's going on in their lives, and that they are ultimately seen as a threat or a problem or something that has to be solved instead of a human that can be engaged with.
Well, that, is such a good segue to our mutual friend, Joanna Schroeder, who co-wrote a beautiful book called Talk to Your Boys. And this idea of how, in a big way, how simple it is, right? But let me ask you this. So my boys I've got the greatest kids in the world. They're 13 and 15. I pick my son up every day. How's your day? Fine. And then I'll try to be creative. I'll think, what was something really unexpected that happened, right? I'm just picking the kid up from school. And then they're like, nothing unexpected. And I'm like grasping what, just as a practical matter, Mark. And I realize it's different depending on their ages, but for, let's say, parents of tweens, maybe 10 through, 10, 11 through their teenage years, what are those questions that we should that will more quickly open up those kinds of conversations? And because here's the other thing. If I sit my kids down to have any kind of talk, it's like, oh, it's heavy, right? And they don't want that, right? So it's like, okay, we're driving from school, or we're sitting in the chairlift, skiing or whatever. Like it feels to me, and part of me, I'm going to answer a little bit my own question. When I feel like, like I'm trying to get something done, that energy is contagious in a bad way. Like if I'm trying to get something from my kid, either it's like this really sweet moment, or I want them to reveal something, that energy is like, shuts it down. Versus I know when I'm really open, like my energy is chill. Like so it feels like to me, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, it's not just what we're asking, it's how we're showing up physically, emotionally to them, like in our energy.
Yeah. Well, I think that first shout out to Joanna. She's, you want to understand how to have conversations and engage with your kids, get her book, because that's prime real estate for sort of understanding that.
Well, can I just chime in too, just to be like really for parents of men and boys, and even older, like sometimes people think, well, my kid's in his 20s now. It's not too late. Personally, I believe it's never too late to forge a better connection with your child or your parent, but that's not what we're talking about right now. What I especially loved, and it gives me chills, what I especially loved about Joanna's book, the quotes that she and her co-author, Christopher, share from kids that are younger to young men in the early 20s, gutted me. Just what they would say in a sentence or two or a small paragraph about their experience, about where they're coming from, where they had permission to speak candidly. It was revelatory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're so dismissive. I feel like in society, and I'm not a dismissive person by nature. I do the work that I do because I care deeply and with my kids and, all these important men around me. And yet it's so easy to be dismissive, right? And I feel like what you're
What do you
saying
mean
and
by
what,
dismissive? Tell me a little more
well,
about that
like not,
piece.
I guess, like not to sit down and really, it's what you're advocating here. It's really to be intentional and um, meet these young men and boys where they are and really try to understand versus like we're all just going, it's like, especially when you're a working mom, like you're just trying to get homework done, like you're just trying to get stuff done, right? And that's what so I don't, maybe dismissive isn't the right word, but maybe it's just not as intentional to really
I think
tune
the
in.
word dismissive is really powerful in the sense that um, it's a useful frame to work from. Trying to understand the frames that we use as parents with our kids can seem effortful or they can seem joyful and playful. So if you take a phrase like trying to understand and replace it with curious, I am playfully curious. Along with Joanna's book, my partner, Dr. Saliha Baba, and I, she's a couple and family therapist, wrote a book called The Relational Book for Parenting. And it's essentially over 200 stories, games, ideas that you can play with kids all throughout their process of growing up that creates this idea for them that we in this family are shaping each other and we are creating relationships, and that when we parent our children, we're showing them how to create relationships. And one of the central pieces of the book is what we call the relational wheel. And it's a set of relational capacities, things like holding curiosity, things like considering context. And all of these things we have examples of how to do it with a kid on a walk to the park. And the bottom line here for us is that our children know when we're trying to extract something, like you said, like when we're trying to get something for nothing. We're not giving awareness of what's going on for us in that moment. We're saying, I'm your parent. Tell me how school was. Perfectly understandable question. But when we are more playful, more curious, more amused, our children are like, oh, I'll play a game. Yeah, I'll do that. And I'll give you an example of one of the things. And we made up and created games with our son when he was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One of the things, my son's the child of divorce. And my wife, Saliha, and I got married when he was 4. And come about age 5, he spent a lot of time with us. For a couple of years, he was with us exclusively. And at a certain point in time, we would have a disagreement, Saliha and I, in his presence. And he would get very upset. He was like, don't fight. And we would look at each other and be like, And we realized pretty quickly that he didn't want another divorce. He did not want to see that happen again. He didn't want to witness that. So there's a lot of anxiety for him. So what we did was we said, well, you know what? Hey, let's get a 1 through 6, okay? 1 is a discussion, 2 is a debate, 3 is a disagreement, 4 is an argument, 5 is a fight, and 6 is the worst thing possible. So what you just saw, where would you put that one? And he'd think about it for a second and be like, well, I don't know, I guess a 3. And I'd say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I want you to pretend you're having a fight with Saliha, and I'll try to guess what level 1 through 6 it is. Okay, so you guys go ahead, I'll watch. And he'd get this look on his face like, oh, okay. And he'd turn around to Saliha and he'd say, okay, let's do it. And she'd say, all right, what do you want for dinner? And he'd say, I want spaghetti. And she'd say, well, I want meatloaf. And he'd say, well, spaghetti's better. And she'd say, nobody likes spaghetti. And then they'd turn back and look at me. And I'd say, well, I don't know. That was kind of a debate, wasn't it? Was that a debate? Long and short of it is, we played this game with him for a couple of months, and he was no longer reactive because he could take a simple idea, a fight is a fight is a fight, and open it up like an accordion into different levels and possibilities. These are the kind of games we have in the book. And in this way, our children are waiting to play with us. They're waiting to be in these sort of interesting, curious processes. We just had to meet them where they are.
Well, you know what it strikes me, Mark, and listening to you, and by the way, it's so funny. Like, because I try to be so conscientious about language and using words and not even the words, but like inhabiting curiosity and just like, okay, it doesn't have to be hard work, right? Play and fun really are superpowers and punch way above their weight. So it's interesting. You're reminding me of that. Cause I was like, oh yeah, that's right. But it also reminds me of in this more like disconnected dominance based culture that is so prevalent. I mean, aggression is diametrically opposed to fun, right? And so when I think about just being more and, between fun and curiosity and making it play-based, I mean, for us as parents, but it strikes me, I don't know. I mean, it makes me wonder where we can all be maybe a little more intentionally in that more joyful, playful place. Because I mean, and again, when I think loneliness, epidemic and the world of overwhelm and degree of anxiety, mental health crisis that we're all living in, I mean, no wonder aggression is so prevalent in a way because it's like there's so much pressure, economic pressure. Like it really becomes to me very macro, right? In addition and meta. And then let me actually say this, again, referring to Joanna, our mutual friend, she talks a lot about how at its root, so much male rage is about shame. Where does that shame come from? And as a man, how do you suggest other men, or how do you suggest men process their shame more constructively?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about man box culture again as a set of rules that we're taught to conform to. This is a very brittle, narrow definition of what it means to be a man. Be tough, never ask for help. These kinds of ideas are very narrow and very brittle. And what we come to understand is that every man, to greater or lesser degrees, in order to fit into that narrow, brittle performance. It's a performance. We call it a performance because it's being watched by other men, right? We're all policing each other to make sure we're doing it right. This narrow performance requires that we hide aspects of ourselves that are authentic, right? Now, for some men, especially in the 1950s, that can be as big as their sexual identity. Literally, men who were gay simply hid it, right? But it can also be for any of us. It can be just, you go to the bar and you meet 5 guys. Well, you're not going to talk about the little kindnesses you might have done for your wife that day because they're going to say, oh, dude, you're whipped. This whole sort of microaggression, friendly policing. Ultimately, men are hiding who they are in order to fit into man box culture. They're trying to perform masculinity in a certain way so that they won't be the one that gets policed or bullied. And when you do that, ultimately you begin to grow your level of anxiety because not only are you self-alienating, right? Setting aside significant parts of who you are to the point where sometimes you forget they even exist. But because of that performance of masculinity, you're also not forming real, authentic, genuine friendships. So you're left with this, am I doing it right? Energy all the time. And the fact of the matter is that if men want to experience a richer, more meaningful life, they've got to bring those parts of themselves that are condemned in man box culture, reintegrate them in and begin to live them for real. And when we do, we can expect to be shamed, right? To be told, you're not a real man, you're a sissy, you're a woman, you're this, you're that. And until we're ready to take on that shame, to face the shame that we have internalized, that we have the cop in our own head, we're calling ourselves weak for wanting to be those parts of ourselves. That's the closed loop that we're caught in, right? That we have this part of ourselves which is shamed and hidden and suppressed. And we have this part of ourselves that keeps shaming and hiding it and suppressing it in other men in order to try to validate this brittle masculinity. It's an ugly loop. And ultimately, if men are driven by shame, we are also driven by the anxiety of not being able to be fully human.
Oh my God, it's exhausting.
It is. It's brutal.
I mean, and tragic.
And when men break out of the man box, the first thing we do is we walk down the street and go, you know what? I'm just gonna do some normal stuff for me, things that fit for me. We can talk about the idea that instead of masculinity, we have a plurality of masculinities. Judy Chu talks about as many masculinities as there are men to perform them. And when we have that view of masculinity, we can say to our sons or to ourselves, look, find whatever version fits for you and slot yourself in there. Maybe do different versions during the day. I don't mean to take an idea from Black culture and use it for this, but code switching is an idea that we could apply here. I'm a different man when I'm with my child than I am when I'm with my coworkers, than I am when I'm in a threatening situation, than I am when I'm with my partner. And we allow ourselves to move fluidly between those different versions as we need to. And we don't say, hey, my natural inclination would be to go to this version of myself, but I don't want to get in trouble with my boys, my men. So when we do that, we've suddenly gone bonk into a wall that limits our full range of human capacities and how we can be effective, how we can create community, how we make meaning, and what we're modeling for our young sons and daughters, right? It's a fascinating thing.
It is super fascinating. And so for me, again, as a woman who is connected to men in a lot of different capacities, what do you, and this show is watched predominantly by women. And listen, we want guys to be proactive too. So maybe I shouldn't ask, what should women do? When it comes to obviating or healing that shame, because if I'd love to do that root cause, and yes, the code switching, and there's some other things, and I want to ask you about some of the micro behaviors. It's something that, microaggressions, micro behaviors, but what can you do? Because a lot of people are going to listen to this, and I realize it's a very long question, so thanks for bearing with me. Nobody wants to lay on a therapist's couch for 10 years and just feel like this is a never-ending process to heal, right? And I realize there aren't quick fixes, but I'm sitting here speaking with you, and I'm so passionate about what you're doing. It's like, what are some additional practical ways, short of laying on a therapist's couch for 10 years, not putting your head in the sand and saying, okay, this is too big of a problem. You know what I mean? Like, what are some, just 2 or 3 other practical things that we can do as women who are trying to help the men and boys in our lives? And for men who are listening to this and going, yeah, I want to be part of the solution. This really resonates with me.
Yeah. You're asking the easy questions, and I appreciate that, Andrea. I'm like, holy Toledo. There's a lot to be talked about in this question, but I think I have to think about my own movement from being fully in man box culture. And I want to be clear. I didn't spend my time trying to have power over women and girls. I was in man box culture in the sense that I tried to perform financial success, professional success, having a good looking girlfriend, whatever it was, those narrow performances, because I wanted to belong somehow, somewhere.
Amen. Well, you have to. I mean, that's survival. Like, belonging is key to survival. So
right, but it's a false belonging because it's all based on what I'm doing instead of who I am. But that being said, the thing that happened to me was that slowly over time, and the birth of my son was a big part of this, I began to discover and understand that there were aspects of myself that meant something to him that I thought had no value, but turned out to be central to who I am, which was, when he was upset, I knew automatically, my hands knew how to pick him up. I knew how to hold him close. When he was a little guy, I knew how to listen to the sounds he was making and give him comfort in ways that arguably maybe weren't done for me, right? So many of us as men can make huge changes in our lives for our children that we would not make for ourselves or even for our spouses. And that can be a key for us to say, that connection, that rich connection right there, I can have that everywhere. All I have to do is self-reflect about the rules of the man box and how they showed up in the ways that I've created my masculine identity. And it is a creation that we make, right? The culture of masculinity is not some monolithic set of rules that's always been the same. Culture is constantly emerging and changing, but it is the collective agreement we have about how to be men. And we can decide, you know what? The rules of the man box that made me hide my emotions for 40 years, maybe that's not a rule I want to make central to my male identity anymore. Pick a thing that you just don't agree with and let go of it and see what happens when you perform differently. I have to say that a certain percentage of women internalize patriarchy, internalize man box culture, which is a subset of patriarchy. And for those who want to know what I mean by patriarchy, I mean the systems and structures which advantage men over women, and they exist, and they're worse now than they were 20 years ago. But the idea that sometimes women look at men and they go, you know what? I appreciate the fact that you're being a little more open, but don't do that stuff out in the world because you're going to put us at risk. You're going to lose your job. Stuff's going to happen. So people who are genuinely kind, genuinely caring, also see that this larger structure is out there and will target them if they're not careful. So maybe we teach our sons a little bit of that stuff just so they'll be safe, right? And in this way, the insidious nature of whether we agree or disagree with this dominance-based culture of masculinity, part of it is self-protection, part of it is things we've internalized and not examined, and part of it is a lack of clarity about the cost. Because what we need to communicate to men is that this epidemic of loneliness is a direct byproduct of what Niobe Way shows us about breaking boys' connection, and then about existing in a culture of masculinity which is hyper-competitive and hierarchical. You can't form a genuine friendship with someone that has power over you or that you're displaying power over. And the hierarchy of masculinity is one tall, thin ladder, and you're somewhere on it, right? So this epidemic of loneliness, Cigna says that 58% of people in the United States feel sometimes or always alone. I talk about an epidemic of loneliness for men, and some very upset people say there's no epidemic of loneliness for men. And I say, yes, there is, because there's an epidemic of loneliness for all of us, everyone. So men are a part of that, right? But the way that men are driving this epidemic is their belief, after being trained in man box culture, that human connection and compassion and so-called female attributes, empathy, all of those kinds of ideas aren't appropriate to be in a man. And so we're lonely. And when we're lonely, it has the health equivalence of smoking. We have higher levels of heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases. We have obesity. We have diabetes. We have cancer. Cancer metastasizes faster in lonely people. So I want to say to the men out there, look, you may be saying, this man box thing, I don't know, but I'm telling you, if you look around your life and say, I don't really have close friends that I can share what's going on for me, you may have a group of friends. You may have friends at the gym, right, guys? And if you quit that gym, you'll just go to another gym and those will be your friends because it's all the same and it's kind of surface level and whatever. If you don't have friends that you're having real conversations with about the struggles and joys of your life, you're likely to land somewhere on that loneliness spectrum. And if you're on the loneliness spectrum, you'll die sooner. You will die sooner. So this is a real thing for me.
I think just everything you're saying, it tracks. Like there is, other than maybe having an ego sense of superiority or dominance, which that, in this mailbox scenario, like I can't think of anything that actually serves you. In fact, what I'm over here, smiling to myself about, if you go back to Harvard Business Review, easily 15 years ago, maybe even longer, just about every issue, it seems like they would talk about, and still do, emotional intelligence as a way to be much more effective in the workplace. You know what I mean? And so when I think about, how does that equate to compensation and so forth and leadership and promotion? It's like, it is not coincidence, right? So when I think of how we are we're, as Brene Brown says, we're wired for connection. And yet there has been something systemic in our society that has caused this kind of mailbox culture.
I just want to say, Andrea, you're saying mailbox culture.
Oh, did I say the wrong thing?
Well, mailbox versus manbox.
Manbox. Oh, okay. Manbox. Thank you.
Yes.
Right. I got it. Okay. I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm in trouble. Yeah. Manbox culture. It's just interesting to me because for all the things that you're talking about, listen, we all everybody should eat better. I mean, we are more obese in America than we've ever been. We are more sedentary, talking about smoking. I mean, I think the data is pretty clear. Being sedentary is worse than smoking, cigarettes and so forth. I mean, there are all these things we know, and yet look at the behavior of the populace, right? So, and when I listen to you talking about the man box culture and seeing the pervasiveness and utter destructiveness to it, I can only think this comes back to something that's really intractable, and that's identity. Right. And then you talk about how there are quite a few women who also buy into this idea of the patriarchy, and somehow there seems to be a safety there. And, I think the vast majority of people are well-intentioned. That's my sense. Maybe there's a few really bad eggs out there, but my experience is most people are socialized to have these, beliefs, these values. And so when I think about, because you're making an outstanding case for all the reasons people should change. And I guess my point is, but we're still a sedentary, zombied out on our phones, obese society, even though we know better. Right. And not to I feel like this is taking a dark turn. So back to, you were talking about what you're doing as a parent. In fact, I want to come back to the parenting thing, because I think that is where there is so much reason for hope, both as we're raising our kids, as well as for the men who get that privilege. How do you get into, to the extent, if you agree that we are talking, this really goes to people's identity. How do you start to upend that, or can you?
Well, I have been saying for a number of years, we need to have a conversation about culture, not identity. Because if you invite men into a conversation about our culture of masculinity, they're kind of open to that. They're like, yeah, well, this is what I learned, and I learned this from who I know. But when we go to anyone and we say, I want to talk to you about your masculinity, I want to talk to you about masculinity, I want to talk to you about identity, they view that as, oh, you're critical of me. And what we need to understand about men, I got to tell you, this man box culture thing is a beautiful trap. It is so effective. It's generationally effective. But you have to understand, boys start out being joyful, loving their friends, being playful, being exhibiting empathy and caregiving and all this compassion. And by late adolescence, they're giving it up because of trauma, because of violence, because of bullying, right? So we're talking about a traumatizing process by which boys and men are trained into this narrow performance of masculinity. And eventually we get there. On one level or another, we're doing it well enough that the bullies and the so-called alpha males are turning their attention elsewhere. This is a traumatizing process by which we've had to cut huge parts of ourselves out and throw it away, which we've had to perform this version of masculinity, which isn't even a real fit for us. And then people show up and go, that thing you got right there, that identity, that's messed up. It triggers decades of traumatizing punishment. I finally got to the place where I'm not a target anymore, and now you show up out of nowhere and tell me I got to do this all over again? We don't have to talk about identity. We can talk about the culture of masculinity. And when we talk about culture, we say, hey, so does this culture strike you as being something that makes you feel validated and comfortable? Or do you feel like you're kind of in a rat race? Oh man, I'm in a rat race all the time. It's a tell the story of my life. Yeah. Do you have a lot of friends? Not. Well, I got friends with, the cultural conversation is a way into what they learned and why, and what they've applied and what they can choose to let go of. But when we say masculinity is inherently flawed, no one's going to listen to us. No one's.
To be fair, I'm not saying masculinity is inherently flawed. I personally am not, and I don't think you are.
But that's what they hear. That's what they hear.
I got you. Yeah.
Because they're defensive and reactive and isolated and angry. And the degree to which, and believe me, there are people out there right now weaponizing boys' isolation and disconnection online by telling them women hate you, feminists hate you, feminists hate masculinity. So that frame is being actively used by white supremacists to recruit young men into extremism, right? I mean, we know this. So the fact of the matter is, I want to offer you a remarkable story. It's on our podcast, the Remaking Manhood podcast. We interviewed a professor from Brigham Young University. He's a sociology professor, and he did a study. And what he studied was the adult sons of engaged fathers. And he went back to the 1960s in this study. And I'll try to make this quick. But what he discovered was if you had an engaged father, the likelihood that you would support women's rights, be more open to diversity, all of these things got greater. You became more accepting of diversity and women's rights, right? And I was like, that's interesting. So like even in the 1960s, some dads were engaged fathers. And he said, yeah. And I said, so what percentage? And he said, I don't know. It's at varying degrees, but about 20%. And I said, so 20% of dads were teaching their sons like to be open to difference? And he said, no, they were just throwing the football with them in the backyard. I was like, wait, so an engaged father is just present? Yeah, they're going to the baseball games. They're hanging out with their kids. I said, and that created this outcome? He said, yeah. So I said, do you remember, you'll remember this, Andrew. Remember there was a big social panic about helicopter parents? These parents are hovering over their children all the time.
Remember the baby on board signs in the 80s. Oh, my God.
But what I'm telling you is that engaged fathers now and in the 2000s and even in the 1990s, we're talking about a lot more than throwing the ball in the backyard. And we're certainly talking about a larger percentage than 20%. So what we may well be seeing is even as some boys are being radicalized and anti-feminism and all that, we're also seeing a swell of young men who really do care about their friendships and do care about expressing emotionally and do care about extremely powerful personal capacities. And part of it is coming from men like me who raised our son in a daily conversation about what was going on for him. And by the way, I never sat my son down and said, we have to have a talk. That never happened. Never happened. We talked while we were building Lego stuff or making a truck or walking to the soccer ball. And if he had a problem, he'd say, oh, Billy did this to me today. And I'd say, wow, that's not good. What's going on for Billy, do you think? Immediately asking him to consider the world of this other kid. And he would say, well, Billy's just kind of grumpy all the time. And I said, well, what do you suppose it's like at Billy's house? Do you think maybe they have short tempers over there or something? Well, anyway, I don't think it was about you, Gus. I think this kid's got some stuff. And then we'd go on and talk about something else completely different, just dropping in and out of conversations about context or meaning or relationships. This fathering that's going on now and mothering, parenting by non-binary folks, whatever it is much more engaged. And I think we're about to see a renaissance of humanity coming. We talk about an extinction burst for patriarchy going on right now. This idea that they are superheated. Extinction burst. Yeah, this is
extinction. Okay.
Extinction burst. That this is a term that people use for when a certain mindset or cultural phenomenon superheats before it goes away. From my mouth to God's ears, I don't know that there's any evidence to make sure that that's true. But imagine that this next wave of who we are as human beings is coming into being. And the hope that we have is that we are engaging with our children in ways that activate the full nature of being human. And they are going to bring that, once a kid activates both everything across the spectrum. I can be tough. I can be a leader. I can play through the pain. I can be compassionate. I can be caring. I can hold uncertainty. Once they start using all of these human capacities, you offer them these brittle gender binaries. They're like, why would I want that? Why would I reduce myself to that? No, no thanks. So I think there's a lot of hope in the world around that. And I also want to say that the things I'm seeing in the Walking, Talking Men walks also give me huge hope. It is quite remarkable what we're seeing when we invite men to get together and walk and talk about what's going on for them.
Well, I want to ask you a couple other questions about fathers' roles and so forth, but
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's okay. We'll stay on you created this walking, talking phenomenon. Talk about what that is.
In late November of last year, I, after writing and speaking on men's friendships and the lack thereof for 15, 20 years, I looked around my life here in New York City and I said, I have one friend. I have one good friend. This friend of mine, Mark Weidman and I had been going and getting coffee because we were both parents at my kids' school. And for some reason, we kept going for almost 4 years. We had been going and getting coffee. And we had every conversation about every possible frame of mind, way of being, emotional state, anime film, whatever it was, right? I knew this man, and I still know him today, and I love him dearly. And when I spend time with him, I'm totally calm, totally relaxed. It's a beautiful friendship, right? But I told him, I said, I'm thinking about this. There's this thing called Men Walking and Talking in Great Britain, and they're getting together to doing a thing. I'm thinking about doing it, but I don't know, man. It's going to be a lot of emails, and it's weird, and I don't know who will show up. And he said, no, we should do this. And I went, okay, fine, we'll do it. But it was that first friendship that gave me the courage to go forward with announcing a walk. So on the Upper West Side Reddit, we said, hey, we're going to start a walk. And this is the first time for us. And I put a little information about social isolation and the health impact of it. And I said, we have some simple rules. And just show up, and we're going to try. And a guy named Ben Trustman emails me. Don't you like that name, Trustman? Ben Trustman. He emails me, and he says, "Oh, I'm in for that. My wife pointed me to this, And I went, okay. So we start walking, right? And we're going on walks, and we're talking about whatever comes up for us. And
how many people are we talking about at this point?
At this point, maybe 4. Oh, okay. And it's sleeting sideways, right? It's January.
Oh, God.
And we're out there in the park, and we're like walking, and we're talking to each other, right? And the degree to which it had so much value for us that we went right on through the winter storms and into the spring, at which point we had 6 or 7, 8 or 9, 15, 20. But every time I would make a little announcement, I'd get emails from men. And we're talking about a population of men who have self-selected in to go on a walk to make friends. So we're getting a certain population. But some of the guys would email me like, yeah, I like walking. Other guys would email me and they would say, yeah, my partner and I have been talking about this, or I'm fully aware of this, or I've been on the Upper West Side for 6 years and I don't have any friends and I don't know why. I've tried to join, softball teams and we're friends until the season ends and then it goes radio silent. They show up knowing that it's an issue in their life and they want to do something about it. We have men who are in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. We have men in their 70s, right? Walking, having conversations across generations, across race, across sexual identity. And the bottom line is, we have lived so long in a world where we're told by our culture of masculinity that men don't want that that's not what it means to be a man, that's a feminine aspect of what it means to be human, and men don't need these close friendships. That there is a barrier between men. Other men aren't going to, you reach out to a man this way, he's not, the wall is too thick, right? Well, I think enough change has happened, enough emergent self-understanding among men has happened that wall is now rice paper thin. And all you have to do is create the conditions for men to get together and to walk and talk. And they talk. They talk about what's really going on for them. And I have heard men say things on these walks that broke my heart, that was so beautiful, was so rich and real and genuine. And I can give you examples. I can tell you stories that we've had a young dad in mid-30s, right? 2 young kids, I'm going to guess, age 4 and 7, right? He comes on the walk, and we're walking along. Ben and I and he are walking together, and he says, "I don't know, man. I'm getting mad at my kids, and I don't even know why. There's a lot going on, and there is." For a father of 2 young kids, the mother and he are battling it out to try and get everything done. You talked about it, the list, right? The list is endless.
Yeah, you're just trying to get through your freaking day.
I know. And he said, and so, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders. This is a guy who's young, attractive. He's got great style. He's convivial. He seems calm, confident, all that. And so I said, well, I asked him a question, which I ask a lot of men, because we can be deceptively confident, right? Or comfortable. I said, so on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no big deal, 10 being you're not sure you're going to survive this, where are you in terms of how difficult things are right now? He says, I'm a 9 all the time.
Shit.
And I said, man.
I thought you were going to say like a 5 or a 6 for a guy like that.
No, he said, I'm a 9 all the time. And I said, well, Ben and I both have adult kids. And the first thing we said to him was, well, you're not alone, man. We have all been frustrated by parenting, by being in a couple relationship while 2 small children are running around everywhere. You're not alone in that. And secondly, the fact that, you had the courage to come here and share that changes it. When you keep that in your head all the time and don't tell anyone that, it's a very different thing than if you come and share it. Because when you speak those words to someone else who hears them, they are transmuted. They change the nature of your relationship to that challenge. And then, we walked with him for a while longer. We talked about, we were like, hey, so can we ask you some questions? And he was like, yeah. We said, are the frustrating times when you're trying to get them ready for school or when you're trying to get them to bed? We talked through some of that stuff. And by the end of the conversation, he was markedly more comfortable about it. He was like, it's really been helpful. Maybe about 2 weeks later, I was walking with him again, and he was talking about some of the dynamics in his family. And he was feeling some of that shame. And he was feeling some of that, despair. And I said, well, and I had gone and had coffee with him since then. I knew him a little bit. And I said, well, I just want you to know something. You and I have spent some time together, and I want you to hear this. My sense of you is that you are a good man, that you have a kind heart, that you care deeply about everything that you do, and that you are willing to take on hard, difficult tasks, and that you're doing it all the time. But I want you to know, I feel like from what I know about you, I trust you, I care about you, and that you're a good man. I look over at him, he's weeping. I start watering up, right? And he says to me, and I'm 30 years older than him, he says to me, I've never had an older man say that to me.
Oh my God, you're going to make me cry.
The implications of that, right? I love this guy now. And he's been to parties at my house with his family. We are friends. We have a friendship. And the reason we have a friendship is because I have spoken to him about my own challenges equally. And when men get together and have conversations, even light conversations, that dip occasionally into what's really going on in our lives, we are recreating what we did as boys. We're recreating that pre-Niobe way defined trauma. When we had friends that we saw every day at school and we talked about what was going on for us, we're recreating the dynamic by which we help each other and connect and understand each other. And that is what friendship is based on. And man box culture is the opposite of that.
Oh, God, Mark, that's so beautiful.
We got, for reasons I wrote some articles, put some stuff on LinkedIn. NBC Nightly News shows up and they're like, hey, we want to film your walk. It's an interesting story. And I'm like, okay. And so they did that. And, you can look us up where they still have the segment online. And suddenly we get like guys emailing us from all over the country saying, yeah, I want to start a walk here, there, everything. So we have walks now happening in different parts of the country. We have a walk in Spain. We have a walk in Canada. It's a drop in the bucket, man. We should have 1,000 walks in New York City because we're trying to get men to have these walks in their own neighborhoods, to create real, lasting friendships in their own neighborhoods. I know now 7 men that I consider close friends who live blocks away from me. If you're in a driving city, maybe half a mile, whatever it is, but local friendships that you can have in real time, that you can say to a guy, hey, I'm going to a movie. You want to go? I'm going to get coffee. You want to sit? And we sit together and we learn every time incrementally a bit more. And I tell men also, 40 conversations will create something you have not experienced since you were a child. It will create that level of knowledge and understanding of this person that you no longer show up and say, okay, I'm bringing focus and I'm being clear and I'm listening carefully. You just come in trusting. You just come in and
40,
relax.
You're saying 40 conversations. So you talk to somebody 40 times, maybe over a handful of months. I'm pulling the
number out of the air at one level, but I'm also saying by that time, when you see this person, you no longer show up, you relax into the friendship. You're like, this is a place where I can just be.
Be safe and take your mask off a little bit, right?
Oh, and to be confident that I am worthy of knowing. And men can give each other that gift. We do give each other that gift. Another thing that happens on these walks that I've seen, and it boggles my mind a little bit, is the degree to which men hold space for each other naturally. The guys on our walks are like, one of them's a hydrologist, another one's like a marketing guy, right? These are programming guys, right? But a man will start talking about what's going on for them, and these men will hold space. They don't jump in to fix it. They're not, oh, dude, whatever. They hold space and they ask questions and they listen, and this man gets to speak it out, thereby transforming it. And then they have that conversation, right? So when a man is feeling distress or pain or grief or shame or any of the things that we feel, and we let just a little bit of that out, and another man holds space for it, the benefit to the man releasing it is huge. But the benefit to the man who's getting to hold space, I asked my friend Jonathan Jacobs, who leads the walk in LA. I said, I watched him do it one time. I said, how did you learn to do that? He said, I don't really know. My guess is we learned it when we were young boys, but it gets put away, it gets hidden. But the fact of the matter is, he said, I want to do more of this. I really want to do more. And so what we discover is that it's almost as meaningful to hold space for someone and to offer support to other men as it is to be supported. And that's something we don't get asked to do.
Well, maybe even more so. And it doesn't matter, right? It's not a competition, but I just love that you're talking about this idea of holding space, because I think no matter what gender we identify with, to train ourselves to hold space.
We're talking about caregiving, the thing that we're not supposed to do, right? It's happening right there. And the fact of the matter is, when we hold space for someone, what we do is we validate what it means to be in a relationship, right? You talked earlier about emotional intelligence. In our book, the Relational Book for Parenting, we talk about relational intelligence. That is, it goes beyond understanding my emotions and being able to name them and being able to self-regulate. It moves into the idea that whenever we are in relationship with someone, there's you and me, and then there's the relationship, a third entity. And when we focus on caring for the relationship, instead of just pushing what we need or just answering what they need, when we say, I'm going to care for this relationship right now, we are doing that holding space piece long-term for the idea that if we both care for this relationship, we cannot fail.
Well, I'm going to throw a couple studies back that you'll be familiar with, but for those who maybe aren't or could use a little refresher, I mean, that to me at the heart of the Harvard's famous Gluick and Grant studies, right? That what gives you greater longevity, what gives you greater physiological health, emotional health, all the things. Bottom line, how do they conclude the Grant study? Happiness is love, full stop. Right. So when you talk about that, the wisdom of that relational capacity, I mean, it's great. I mean, it makes your life more fun. It makes you healthier, wealthier, all those things. Something that you talk about in your work that I just want to bring up, and so much of this is personal, but a lot of the people listening are professionals as well. So something that you talk about is psychological safety. And in a big, 12 or 13 years ago, Google spent, you may be familiar with this already, Mark, but it's so good to talk about. Google spent millions of dollars on what was called Project Aristotle. And because some of the smartest people in the world work at Google, and there's all this, influence that Google has, they went out to determine what makes the most successful teams, right? And because that will help increase shareholder value and all the right things, innovation and so forth. And after spending millions of dollars and trying to figure out, are they the smartest people? Are they the people that get along the best? All these different hypotheses, it came down, the answer was psychological safety. The most effective teams that Google found were those that people could show up as themselves and they could make mistakes. And I want to be I'm being a little loose here with the research, but generally, I mean, for sure, the psychological safety that these people created in these groups, back to your point about the relational investment, that relational capacity, super punched above its weight.
I get paid to go to corporations and offer them, programming around the question of how to make their teams more effective, all of that. And what I usually do is I'll go to a company and I'll say, I'll be talking to the DEI rep or whoever that is.
Are there any of those anymore?
They do exist. They are
I'd like
in the world.
One or two. Not a target.
Maybe they're, imagine inclusion. Yeah. What a crime. But the fact of the matter, the work continues, right? And I'll ask them a simple question. I'll say, this idea of being more, having more inclusion, more belonging, safe spaces, as you say, on people's teams. You've already got managers who get this, right? And she's like, oh yeah, we do. I say, so who are those guys? Let's put them on a panel. And let's have a conversation about how their lives have changed since they started managing in that way. So they started leading in that way. And I'm talking about, we have men on panels that are the heads of corporate brands that you would recognize instantly, right? So these guys say, yeah, I used to lead the old way. I used to have to come into the room knowing everything. I used to talk in ways where my way or the highway. I used to assume that
command and control, right?
Yeah, all of that stuff. And he said, but since then I've sort of let go of this idea that I have to have the answers coming into the room. And instead I come in and try to create the conditions where everyone feels comfortable enough that they'll offer their ideas. And in that moment, we get a much broader range of possibilities emerge and we find the best solution, right? It takes a load off me in terms of having to determine what the path forward is exclusively, but also people start lighting up in the room. They start feeling more genuinely engaged. I get teams that don't want to break up. I get teams that want to work with me. And my level of stress is down because I feel like I'm in a community of people. And one of the things that we know, there's an organization called Catalyst, which advocates for women's empowerment in the workplace. And they're telling us today, now, in studies, that something like 92% of men in the workplace feel what's called, a level of anxiety in the workplace. And when they are asked what the source of that is, it turns out that it is the fear that they are not performing traditional masculinity well enough in the workplace. So, and and sometimes conflicts can arise around that where men are policing each other. And if it's high enough, those men say, even though they believe that you shouldn't sexually harass women, if one of these guys harasses a woman, they won't say anything. So what we're talking about is men who are sitting in a meeting and a woman says something, and instead of responding to her idea, the first thing they do is check the other men in the room to see if there's a frown or sarcasm, and maybe they'll. So Catalyst is a very important organization. One of the other observations they arrived at about this was that that men continue to think of traditional masculinity as the way that all the other men around them want things done, because it's a culture of silence, right? It silences men. So we never compare notes. The other five guys in the room may feel like, oh no, I don't want that either, right? And then I want to add on to that, Cigna did a study about loneliness in the workplace. And all this alpha stuff about getting to the top, command and control, being the leader, what a great life that is. The loneliest people in corporations are the people who have either worked there for 6 months or less, or who are in the C-suite at the top. And these men on our panels are freeing themselves from that loneliness. But most of those guys are command and control, and they have no sense of interpersonal belonging. And when you operate without belonging, I don't care how much money you have in the bank. You're looking at a loneliness metric, and the loneliness metric will kill you.
Oh, wait. Okay. So then what's the answer for those, for people in those positions? I think I know, but.
Yeah, well, the thing that happens when the head of one of these major corporations gets on a panel and describes his way of working, which is more inclusive and open and connecting and holding curiosity about other people's ideas and making space for them in his meetings, it's a permission granting moment for every other man in that audience, right? So
thank you.
The goal here is that for leaders who have come to understand that this is a more productive, dramatically more innovative, less stress-inducing, creates a more sense of belonging, when they share those observations, because again, you have to remember, man box culture is a culture of silence. So men in organizations are not going to talk to each other about the doubts they have. Our guess is that maybe half the men in organizations would more naturally like to lead from a place of collaboration and cooperation. But they think that that's going to get them fired. They think that's not going to work. They think that all the other men in the room will police them for that. So once men begin talking to each other, oh yeah, when the way I used to do that, it was killing me. Now I feel a lot better. Now we're more productive. Now that's the key, right?
Well, and it reminds me, Mark, I just love that you do this, and it's so fun talking to you, honestly. I mean, because I'm a CEO and run a business, and so it's like, yes, I love doing this show for kind of like moms and dads and friends and sisters, but like with my CEO hat, I'm thinking retention. I want to retain the best people. You know what I mean? And so when I think practically, we've talked about why all these things are practically beneficial, health benefits, longevity, it's more fun. And then with my CEO hat on, it's my team is going to perform better. We're going to have, our retention is through the roof at my company. And I had to learn the hard way. I mean, obviously now we're talking not even just it's not even just man box culture. It's growing up as an executive and getting smarter and learning from your mistakes. One of my favorite people, a mentor to me, a guy named David Bell, former CEO of one of the biggest ad agencies out there, like just David, love you, in the advertising hall of fame, all this stuff. He would always say, he would identify people. He'd go, that's somebody who has all the answers and none of the questions. And it's stuck with me.
And I'll tell you something. Let's just do some transferability of learning here. If that's central to having a better experience as a leader, it's central to having a better experience as a parent. You don't have all the answers, and your child can help you co-design answers that work, right? When we say, hey, this is a thing that's going on, what do you think we should do? You get some
but
darn fine feedback from the staff. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. So, Mark, in your work with fathers, what's a common relational habit that you see men unintentionally pass down to their sons? And how can they interrupt it? We're talking about what people are getting right. I want to talk about what they're unintentionally getting wrong.
Well, I think we can go right back to what we were talking about with the corporate CEO, is fathers feeling like they have to know all of the answers for any challenge that arises for our sons. And there's another piece to this, and it's fathers can grow a very specific capacity. It's like a muscle. You can make it stronger. And that muscle is to sit with someone else's emotional discomfort, right? Because as dads, we may have grown up in households where we weren't allowed to show our emotions. And we were basically given the message that when you show your emotions, you're failing as a son or a brother, right? So we carry that message forward, and our children suddenly begin to display emotions that say, I'm hurt, I'm scared, I'm lonely, I'm upset, I feel cheated, whatever it is. We as men might very quickly lean in with an answer. I'm going to give you a solution to that problem. You know, this happened to you, do this and it'll fix it. Fix it. And we do that. The rest of the sentence that we don't say, but which we're thinking is, do this thing to fix it and stop showing me that emotion because it makes me uncomfortable. When we can sit in a space with a child that is upset and say, tell me more, and say, I'm just going to be here with you, and say, how can I help? What can I do to help you feel better? And just sit with the crying and the pain and the distress that we all produce, that our spouses produce sometimes, that we produce, that our children produce, that our friends produce. When we sit with it and grow that muscle to say, I'm not going to collapse into this emotion. I'm not going to take this emotion on and fill my body with it until I panic and leave the room. I'm here to be with this person and to witness what they're going through, whether it's an infant or your best friend. I'm here to be with them. When you grow that muscle, you create a completely different relationship to how people express what's going on for them with you and how you show up. And you will be remembered as being a solid, completely reliable source of support. Fixing it isn't the solution. Being with it and being okay with that is.
Mark, I think Match.com should hire you because every woman wants to date that man. Every woman wants to marry that man. I mean, that is like the hottest man you can be, right? And I say that, I know I'm maybe sounding a little flippant, but I'm not. Right.
No,
because that's what women, and I would say, whether you're, identify as heterosexual or homosexual, I would say like a guy's going to want that guy. You know what I mean?
My partner and my son taught me how to do it. They taught me how to do these things because they were patient enough with me that they grew that part of who I am. And there's a thing called AI, which is not the other AI.
Not that AI, the other AI.
I forgot what it stands for now. Anyway, it's about focusing on what's working, right? We can look at a whole situation. We can pay attention to what's not working. We can highlight that all the time. We can grow that. We can try to fix that. Or we can focus on what's working. And I had some little component of who I am that allowed me to sit with that. And they helped me grow that by the back and forth of relating. What we say in our relational book for parenting, the quote is, as I'm shaping you, you are shaping me. And when we own that piece wholly and completely, when we're open to being shaped, while we also know that what we do next will shape that other person, there becomes this beautiful synchronicity of intent and meaning and growth that you're talking about, that your boys helped take place in you, that I'm talking about my son and wife helped take place in me. And I'm sure that I have grown aspects of them in positive ways. This is a two-way street that's so beautifully fluid and real. But we have to step out of these narrow ideas about what it means to be a man and bring all the aspects of ourselves that have been there all along.
Well, let me just add to Totally. But let me just add, because when I think about our hyper individualistic society, like that's a problem, right? If you're in a hyper individualistic society and it's all about you and what you're bringing, and you need to know the answers, whether you're in the corporate suite or on the playground or wherever it is, that's not natural. Those people that are making a ton of money and isolated and, like you say, lonely, I'm sorry, I don't care how much money you have. You are not winning in life if you are not connected, because that's what we all need. That's the thing we need the most. That's life's ultimate prize.
If the people around you are not winning too, it's a simple
amen
metric.
To that. Yeah, totally.
Metric,
yeah.
right?
You don't win in isolation.
I'm in a network of human relationships. Is everybody around me suffering so I can be elevated?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's an exploitative culture, right? Which we've seen a lot of, and French Revolution. It eventually comes around. Okay, I've got a couple of quick things. When you were talking about just the experience, I asked you what dads are inadvertently getting wrong, and this idea of fixing it, and somehow because they're not as comfortable maybe with their own emotions, the idea that boys don't cry has been normalized. And I think a lot of us can just laugh it off and just say, well, that's just foolish. Because I even do hear it from time to time. Boys don't cry. What the fuck are you talking about? Can we just enough already?
Well, and understand that crying is one of the manifestations of emotional expression, right? I mean, I say all the time on the internet, hey, let's be more emotionally expressive. And the response from some guys are like, I don't want to cry. I'm not going to cry. Yeah. What, are you going to make me cry, baby? I'm not going to cry. I'm like, how did you arrive at crying as your first default definition of what it means to be emotional? But the point I was going to make real quickly is that it's a spectrum of emotional expression. And if you're prohibiting crying, you're probably prohibiting everything behind it, which means, and emotional expression is central to relating. It's central to communicating to someone else who we are. Oh, I'm a little giddy today. I'm a little happy. Oh, I'm feeling really heavy. This is a difficult time. Oh, I'm grieving. Oh, I'm joyful. When we prohibit that, we step away from what it means to be in relationship with someone else. And by the way, emotions, you talk about individualizing. Emotions are not, you say something to me, my emotion isn't born in me and then I put it in my hand and hand it over to you. In the back and forth of relating, emotions are born. They're born in that relational space. And depending on I may start out a conversation with you for I'm feeling a little uncertain. Then we may talk a little longer, and I may for some reason take issue and be a little irritated. Then we talk more and I better understand. And I become more comfortable and cheerful. The emotions are co-created. We co-create them with other people. They are never created in isolation. And even if I'm sitting alone in my house, thinking of my father and having an emotion, it is based on the relationship we had. So emotions are the magic by which we more fully engage in relationships. And it's no accident that the man box is like, don't do that. Niobe Way says that when you tell boys don't show your emotions, which is essentially pretend you're invulnerable, it's the beginning of every other problem that boys and men wrestle with. And I agree with her. I think if we were able to sit with our emotions and be present, we wouldn't be as easy to manipulate by extremists. We wouldn't be as politically reactive. We wouldn't be as frustrated and angry at our coworkers. We wouldn't be so quick to do things which harm our professional and personal relationships. And ultimately, as we age, we would come into a state of peace and comfort instead of a state of increasing anxiety as we're kicked out of the man box and not allowed to win any of those races anymore because we're too old. It's not an accident that older white men above all others have the highest statistics of suicide, because we live in a culture where we are disconnected from ourselves. And once we lose the markers of money and income and strength and marriage and whatever might fail in our lives, we're left with nothing but anger and frustration. And eventually, sometimes we turn that on ourselves. And that's the one emotion that we're allowed to do, anger. That's the one. But behind it lies fear, loss, grief, shame, all that stuff. And until we dig down to those and learn to sit with them and learn to share them and learn to host them for other people, we're going to be at the mercy of them. They're going to run our lives.
Well, and that, so I want to make two comments, and I love that so much. I mean, you could see from my enthusiastic response to you. I mean, your point about being easily manipulated. Yeah. I mean, you think like my kids, we joke about being rage baited because they're 13 and 15. But it's real, right? And so it just makes me think like there is a bit of a perverse logic to why, emotions in so-called, masculine men. I mean, we all want masculine men, by the way. We all want healthy masculine men. Like that is the greatest thing we can all have. Not the greatest, but like among the greatest. Healthy masculinity is fantastic. And what we're, I think, identifying here is being able to stay regulated and being friendly with your emotions actually is the path to healthy masculinity. But it strikes me why that was not the case because of this whole business of, well, if you're if you're showing or feeling emotions, there could be you may not have the control that, that you should have. I don't know. I mean, it strikes me that could be a explanation.
Right. Well, it pivots toward the idea that we are constantly at risk. So don't show your emotions because you'll be vulnerable. But what it doesn't acknowledge, if this is a spectrum of possibilities in any series of interactions, and half of them represent, let me do the half of them. If half of them represents, okay, these are vulnerabilities in the sense that I could be attacked by someone in man box culture. I could be that and the other. It fails to acknowledge the rich agency and power that being more emotionally expressive also creates. So you have all this connection in the world that gets created. We all know somebody at the office from some point in our lives that we were like, that person is magnetic. They are so appealing. And it isn't because they're modeling power. It's because they're modeling connection, right? And connection is in part being comfortable in your own skin, right? You laugh openly when something's funny. You give people a hug. You talk about things that are going on. So if men are vulnerable, it is not because we are open to attack. It's because we've cut ourselves off. And in that moment, we have made it more likely that we will die younger. And by the way, ask any social anthropologist about why we're even on the planet. Human beings evolved and survived because of our capacity to create community. That's how we survived for 500,000 years. And the idea that suddenly we're going to give that up so we can have bootstrap individualism and drive around in our big pickup trucks and sit in our gated communities looking at our big screen TVs, that's not a survivable metric. We won't survive as a species, much less as individuals, right? So this is not a game. This is not a joke. We are looking at a possible significant challenge to our survivability as a species if we don't start caring for each other. What I would also leave people with is this question. We get a lot of messaging every day from people around us, from media, from all these different sources. And when anybody is asking you to dehumanize, disconnect, and demonize any other population, that should be a clear signal to you that they're trying to isolate you. And isolation is the way that they manage and control large populations. It is a manipulation strategy, right? I'm going to pick your enemies for you, and then I want you to hate on them while I pick your pocket. So Americans, people all over the world, anyone listening to this podcast, when someone suggests to you that you should have an open heart, keep that person close, because that person is going to help you build community and connection and help you live a long and meaningful life.
Okay, I have one last question for you, and let's see if you can, because we've been talking for a while, but I've loved every minute of it. Thank you. You've made a lot of men's rights activists angry in the past. It strikes me as weird because a lot of these guys have similar values to yours: fatherhood rights, men's mental health, male survivor advocacy. Will you give us some context to this? Just because I feel like to understand maybe where there can be some confusion and even conflict when people are trying to solve these similar problems, but then they can run in and have a little bit of conflict. So I'm just wondering, how does it, what's happened and how have you been in the metaphorical crosshairs of some of those groups?
Well, MRAs, along with MGTOWs,
Hang on, will you identify MRAs and MGTOWs? What are those?
Men's rights advocates, men going their own way, and then incels. These are three different primary groups within what's called the manosphere. And this is a population of men online who first and foremost, above all else, blame their problems on women. And this is why they've run afoul of me. They may care about men's mental health, but until they acknowledge that men's primary threat is other men, training them to shut down, disconnect, and be lonely, until they acknowledge that over the idea that somehow women are getting all the advantages and men don't have jobs anymore and blah, 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 until they acknowledge that this is not something women have done to men, it is something we have done to ourselves, they will continue to seek ways to blame women. And blaming women is not normal. It is extremist. It is an extremist position. It is common, but it is not normative. It is extremist. And an extremist position that blames any group or population, immigrants, people of color, people of other religions, whatever, that's your key signal that someone is trying to create division, binaries, isolation, and then weaponize the anxiety that comes out of that. Those guys, MRAs, they may talk a good game about caring about men, but when it comes down to it, they're not willing to challenge the central thesis of American masculinity, which is isolating us and killing us early. For a long time, I struggled with men. I didn't trust them. I didn't like them. I'd spent a lifetime being bullied, pushed around, messed with. I was not comfortable with men. But over the course of the last 15 years of my life, I did some men's work with the Mankind Project. I did my own work. I grew with my wife and son. And then over the last year of doing this walk, I have become happily someone who loves men. I meet a man and I think, I could say this to anyone, but I meet a man and I say, brother, given all the shit this culture throws at you, I'm amazed you're on your feet. Good for you. What do we have in common? Let's grow that. The idea that we can have compassion for men, even as we hold them accountable for some of the decisions they're making. If we cannot bring a wall of compassion to everyone, regardless of who they are, and then say, here's what I need from you in order to be able to continue to be in relationship with you. Here's what I need in the way of accountability. Because we've had, 15 years of calling people out instead of calling them in. We've had 15 years of identity politics, which are not intersectional at all, which limit people to one version of their identity and don't look at their stories and histories and backgrounds and all that. We need a more complex, nuanced way to express compassion while we hold people accountable.
Amen. And I think that is a great note to end on. We've been talking for a while. Say it one more time.
Yes, well, of course, we need to create if we want to create social justice in the world, which is a valid and useful undertaking for all of us, we need to bring equal parts compassion and accountability. We need to hold men accountable while we also offer them compassion, because like everyone else on the planet, we're all carrying a lot of trauma and a lot of harm. And compassion is the key to getting through that. It's about love.
Amen. All right. That's where we end. Mark Greene, thank you so much for being such an outstanding guest on Getting Open. I've really loved our conversation. I've learned a lot from you today.
Thank you for having me on, Andrea. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Getting Open. As I suggested at the beginning of the show, I would love to hear if your opinions on manhood and masculinity have changed. Let me know in the comments. And as always, if you aren't subscribed to or already following our show, wherever you get podcasts on iHeart, Spotify, YouTube, you name it, please do. I don't want you to miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.